discuss the 800 billion naira subsidy debts and threats of shutdown by oil marketers. We have joining us in the studio an economist, Abi Aida. Abi, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
It's good to see you.
Nice to see you again.
Right.
Glad to have you join us.
And we also have the Executive Director, Committee for the Protection of People's Mandate, Nelson Kujumi. Nelson, good morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure.
Nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
Right. And on Skype is the Managing Director, Chief Executive Officer, Taros Capital, Nemeka Obiareri. Nemeka, good morning. It's good to have you join us right now.
Good morning, Mike.
Good. All right, Abi, let me start with you on this. There is this uncertainty. How is it going to be? What would it look like? How would things play out? Especially when some of the major unions in the country, some are on strike, like ASU is on strike. ASUP, the Polytechnic, is threatening to join the strike. The NLC has a face-off with government. No one really, warming up one way or the other. No one knows how it's going to play out. And then we still have the 5 days grace ultimatum given to government by DAPMAN. And these are all unions that one way or the other have their roles, their commission or mission has a way of impacting on the economy. What's that uncertainty you are seeing?
Thank you very much. I think that uncertainty is as a result of the framework governing all these industries. They're built on unsustainable models. And all these dislocations you're seeing is because the fundamentals of these models don't actually work from any perspective. They're usually unsustainable, and I think they've arisen out of a result of what I like to call the middle class addiction, which is that we generally, culturally, don't like to pay a fair market price for certain goods or services which we portray as our right and what we are getting out of this economic system which we all operate under. So these dislocations, that is why they're recurring decimals. That is why they come up periodically. That is why it's usually conduct of settlements by threats of going on strike or actually going on strike. And so it's not surprising. It's not going to stop until we change what is actually leading to this. We just treat the symptoms, we never treat the cause. So there's no surprise on any of this, and I expect it to get worse.
Nelson Kujimi, they say everything rises and falls on leadership. Let's narrow this down to the 800 billion naira oil marketers are asking for, of course, the fuel subsidy. Now, this is not an issue that began this year, not even 5 years ago. We're talking about subsidy arrears accruing all the way from 2006, 12 years ago. Earlier, Mr. President had written to the National Assembly. He wants approval of establishment for promissory notes program, bond issuance to settle local debts, which of course covers contractual obligations of this full subsidy. And the National Assembly actually processed and passed this request in July of this year. Why did it take 12 years to settle this debt, and why is it taking close to 4 or 5 months for what the National Assembly has passed to actually being paid to the oil marketers?
Well, thank you very much. Like Aida rightly said, there are so much dislocations within the system, and you know very well that when a money has been appropriated, it's a different ball game to the availability of making that money, to be paid. But be that as it may, you want to ask yourself, the 800 billion naira that we're talking about, it didn't just start today. What are those agencies responsible for ensuring that those debts are verified and, outstanding claims, promptly settled? Because you recognize the fact that a lot of these marketers, in transacting their businesses, have had to borrow money from, financial institutions or what have you. And in borrowing such funds, they are going to pay interest. When you were reading the paper review, you were talking about the fragility of the economy. These are also factors, that makes the economy very fragile. When people don't have enough funds to carry out their businesses just because the debtors are refusing to pay. Because if these debts are legitimate debts, I see no reason why the government should have to wait till now or for a threat of strike before they could rise.
Could it also be a challenge of continuity in government? Because at the floor of the Senate, I think yesterday or the day before, there were arguments, last week thereabout, there were arguments as regards who's responsible for this debt. And we were hearing people, blame previous previous government. Must we always get to this point?
Well, it's unfortunate, but like we all know, government is a continuum. If people have transacted business with government, because when they transact that business, they are not transacting it with themselves. They are transacting with government. You talked about bridging costs and every other cost. These are costs that even if the House of Assembly or the National Assembly or the relevant agencies are not clear about, they can ask for clarification. It is their responsibility. It's unfortunate that we have to get to this stage every now and then, where unions or people have to issue threats before they get, whatever is due there legitimately.
All right, let me bring in Nnameka Obiareri now. Nnameka, we have seen times, years before, where Christmas is spent people talk about bleak Christmas and all of that. We expect an improvement on subsequent years, but this year is peculiar because we're preparing for election. And last year we didn't hear many of these unions threatening to go on strike and all of that. Could this be a tactic deployed by many of the unions, from DAPMA to NLC to ASU to ASUP and all of that? Is it a tactic to hold government accountable or make sure that their demands are met one way or the other before the election?
Mike, I don't agree with that. That is a tactics.
Okay.
Mike, we are talking about 800 billion naira subsidy debt that has been owed over the last 10 years. Mike, we are talking about companies that are owing banks. If you go to the books of most deposit money banks, we have over 1 trillion naira in toxic assets attributable to the downstream oil and gas sector. But Mike, we need to be honest with ourselves and look at the root cause of this problem. Honestly speaking, I see this problem as a cumulative effect of irresponsible leadership and irresponsible followership among Nigerians. Mike, Nigeria is the only country across the sub-Saharan African region that is still subsidizing the white petroleum product. If you go to Chad, Chad refines 20,000 barrels of crude every day. They consume internally 6,000 barrels, and the price of a liter of gasoline in Chad, in Niger, is about 90 cents. Here in Nigeria, it is 45 cents. We have come to the point where we need to ask ourselves this question: how long can we continue to condone this irresponsibility in leadership across board? Mike, Nigeria had the opportunity of deregulating the downstream oil and gas sector when Kachuki became the Minister for Petroleum Resources. He now came up with what we call modulated system that is not heard of anywhere in the whole world. We must come to this reality. In 2017, we spent over 1.4 trillion naira subsidizing the white petroleum product. The figure in 2018 is going to get up to 1.8 trillion. Mike, 3.2 trillion in 2 years, $10 billion to subsidize the white petroleum product. When, if you go from Chad to Niger to Liberia to Cote d'Ivoire to Cameroon, our neighbors, you will discover that it is not the same thing altogether. And the problem we have is that we have lack of leadership, political way to do what is right, and we have lack of ignorance among the followership. I think this incessant problem we're having in this country, there is only one way out. And that one way out is to deregulate totally the downstream oil and gas sector. We are having this problem because successive governments, it is not a matter of politics now. It's not a matter of blaming B or A. It's a matter of collective irresponsibility on the part of leadership, collective irresponsibility and ignorance on the part of followership. Nigeria can move forward if we decide to do the right things. I don't think it's a tactics by the unionists to hold the government, to ransom. Because most of these companies are bleeding. Mike, have we put out to ask ourselves this question? Wherever there is subsidy, there is tendency for corruption. In the last 5 years, in the last 8 years, from 2011 to 2015, we are consuming an average of 28 to 35 million liters a day. Today, since 2016, January 1st, we are told that we now consume 60 million liters per day. Mike, who does that? If you go from records from other global agencies, it is recorded that the average consumption of the PMS for Nigeria should be about 24 million to 28 million liters per day. Mike, where did we manufacture the ghost consumers that have taken us from an average of 35 million liters a day to 60 million liters a day? And we are paying so much on this.
All right, so what you're saying, Emeka, is that some people are benefiting from the system not working. It's not necessarily about incompetence, but some people are deliberately benefiting from it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Mike. Subsidies, consumption subsidies of whatever nature breeds corruption. Mike, in this country, we had the same issue with fertilizer consumption. When the federal government was control the production of fertilizer, we had this when we were losing almost about 200 billion naira every year on fertilizer fraud, until Akinwumi Adesina came and liberalized the market and removed those subsidies, and we saw sanity in that sector. Today, farmers can have easy access to fertilizer without the undue consumption that we had, corruption that we had then in the Federal Ministry of Agriculture. The same thing in our downstream oil and gas sector. Every successive government will promise that they will deregulate it. Once they get there and they lay hold on those sleazy slush fund conduit pipe called NNPC, they will go back on their promises. Mike, we have no reason in 2018 to be the only country in West Africa still condoning this corruption-infested subsidy regime. Every human being has the tendency to manipulate systems. As long as this subsidy regime continues within our horizon, within our polity, Mike, it will be the same story year in, year out.
Okay.
The federal government of Nigeria, the National Assembly, must muster the political will, and the followership must understand
it's all right.
All right.
You seem to have quite a number of things to talk about. We'll be back shortly.
He talked about the issue of subsidy. There's something basically wrong with subsidy.
He also mentioned the need to deregulate the downstream sector, which many would say that indeed is a solution going forward. It was the Senate leader, Ahmed Lawan, who blamed this present situation on previous government, saying that many of the oil marketers asking for subsidy are allies of previous governments. You also recall that earlier in the year, the Senate, the National Assembly, had a challenge with the federal government, how for subsidy were being paid without proper legislation. How do we deal with this backlog before we start moving forward?
Thank you very much. I admire the previous speaker's passion, and because this is something that's very dear to the heart of all Nigerians, it's a no-brainer. We're going to deregulate. But unfortunately, it appears we're really going to have to suffer before we can get to that destination. And it's actually quite sad because...
But when you say we are going to suffer, aren't Nigerians suffering this already?
We're going to suffer more. Let me tell you, be the first to tell you. We are. There's devaluation coming and when that happens, it's only going to exacerbate the current conditions. The gap will build. There will continue to be rent-seeking. Corruption will flourish. The government will... It's getting more and more difficult to muster the political will to do what is right. Do not forget, even within this current government, if you go back to 2012 and Occupy Nigeria, a lot of the players currently in government were a lot of the people who ensured that that strike forced the government to back down from the deregulation. So all of this is nothing new. There is no way this can hold. We're going to go through this, and because of elections, they will probably pay and they'll postpone the evil day again. And the second they get in, until and unless we do it, we are going to continue to have this discussion. It's great for analysts like us because we get to come out again and talk about it. But it's actually, if you ask me, it's a definition of madness because the solution is so clear. It is so glaring. That is why you hear such passionate voices speaking up right now, that it just does not make any sense.
Okay, we will look at, because when you say we're going to suffer more, I wonder how much more suffering Nigerians are going to take, but we will look at that. Nelson, when it comes to the issue of, we hear that government has agreed one way or the other to settle the Dapman Association, and they're going to pay them, or agreeing to pay them something in the range of 232 billion naira. Even though they've not agreed whether it's going to be promissory note, they said, no, we don't want promissory note, we want the monies and all of that. But if that goes on and they give Dapman over 200 billion naira, it is the same, almost the same amount of money ASU has been asking you to say, okay, we want 1.3 trillion naira, but you can pay it in tranches. Give us about 200. You've done it before, so let us start from there. ASUP is asking for theirs. NLC is asking for 30,000. When you put all of this together in the mix, how more complicated are the situations for government going forward? Does the government really have the capacity? Because government is saying, well, we don't have all this money to do this or to do that. They've told us outrightly, we don't have monies to pay you. But then, monies are going to, they're promising DAPMA about 200 billion naira. How will all of this mix?
Well, the truth of the matter is that I don't see it being complicated, because government has various arms. Government is like an octopus. On its head, it has about, 1 million roots. So every agency of government or every intervention of government in the lives of the people has a mechanism through which it's supposed to run. So if government is failing in, say, item A, it does not mean we should allow it to also happen in item B. That would be an act of irresponsibility. If that man or more man are saying government is owing them, the question we should ask, are those legitimate debts or ghost debts or fraudulent debts? If they are legitimate debts that we know you are owing, then it is your responsibility to pay. We don't want to know how you get the money. The issue is for you to face the people who are claiming you are owing them and you have agreed you are owing them. Look for a way to settle them, whether you are giving them promissory notes or cash. That just find a way to resolve that crisis, because that crisis goes beyond the unions and the government alone. It affects the generality of the people. We're talking about funds now. If the banks don't have enough funds, if their funds are, being kept by the government, the banks will not be able to lend more to other willing, borrowers. And that way the economy will become contracted. The man who has borrowed money to, to finance a business, if the interest is paying on that loan is now more than what he's supposed to get, that means you are bankrupting that means you are killing businesses. So no matter, maybe ASUP, the responsibility of government is to address all these problems, because that is what government exists for, to ameliorate the human condition, no matter what.
The bureaucratic, I'm coming to you now, Inemaka, the bureaucratic bottlenecks between when funds are appropriated and the real cash gets to the other party is a big challenge in this part of the world. The Senate already has fingered the Debt Management Office of introducing some very stringent measures in the issuance of promissory notes. They are of the opinion that once it has been passed by the National Assembly, all of that, all of the processes that the DMO is asking for is not quite necessary. How optimistic really are you that before these 5 days of grace or ultimatum elapses, that government indeed would have paid this money?
Mike, I don't see anything that will stop the government from paying on Friday. It is strange that we are still struggling. We talk about budgeting and the disbursement of funds. Mike, if you look at our budget for 2017 and 2018, remember that sometimes I begin to wonder why we have so much deficit, why we are still borrowing to fund the budget. Our budget was based on certain assumptions. Crude oil output was pegged at 2.2 million barrels a day. Prices of the crude oil were put at $51 per barrel. Mike, over the last 6 to 8 months, oil has been trading at an average of about $71 per barrel. That in essence simply means that we are actually earning more than we budgeted. And that in essence should have actually narrowed the deficit gap. But today, despite the fact that the oil prices are selling far above what we anticipated in the budget, what we used as the basis, we are still borrowing heavily. Our budget deficit has widened to almost about 2.8 trillion. It seems like magic. The problem we have now is not that government cannot pay. The problem is the will for the government to do what is right. Governance all over the world is about responsibility. It's about doing what is right. It's about doing what is proper, not about doing what is politically expedient. The federal government of Nigeria can pay. It's not just paying. We must all sit down and agree that the only way forward is for us to totally deregulate the downstream oil and gas sector.
Okay.
Remove the subsidy scheme. Let me tell you, if the Blue Star Consortium had been allowed to take over the refineries that they paid for in 2007, today we wouldn't have been having this issue of subsidy. And somebody said that we are going to suffer more. We wouldn't have been suffering more, because the truth is, If we have refined what we produce here, the price of the refined petroleum will come down, because there are certain cost elements that is priced into the price of the PMS we consume here that will have been eliminated. The issue of freight, the issue of winter premium and other things that are factored in by oil traders that sell these products to us will have been eliminated if we have been producing what we consume here.
Okay.
The mistake we made in 2007 was to reverse the sale of the refineries to the Blue Star consortium that was led by Aliko Dangote. If you had allowed that sale to have stood by now,
the refineries will be working. Okay. The government and Nigerians are still waiting for the almighty Dangote refineries that will be kicking off in about 2020, thereabout. Now, Abi, let me come to you on this. The issue of liquidity. So many economists will say, if all of this money is 800 billion naira, or but let's say, okay, they agree to 200 billion naira is paid to DAPMA, and then ASU, one way or the other, they pay them almost the same amount of money, and then NLC, 30,000 naira from 31st of December, like they are saying, like the reports we're getting, and so on. And then we have the election, where politicians, in fact, they're spending monies now in dollars. What impact will this have on liquidity? Liquidity is going to be all over the place. We have money going around, whether the naira or in pounds or in dollars, as the case may be. Inflation, because certainly all of you would say their relationship between the liquidity and inflation and all of that. What impact will this have on the growth of the economy?
I think it would definitely probably slow the growth, because it's going to push inflation, and also it's going to create exchange rate pressure, because that's going to happen. And it's ironic because we are boosting our money supply through some of these activities, and that is also going to impact on the very things they're trying to modulate through the subsidies. So once again, it comes down to the question is that my concern is not whether these debts can be paid or not. They can be. But at some point, we're going to have to stop the flow and creation of these debts, because what is clear is that we don't have a workable system whereby, as and when due, there's an efficient way to pay for these services. You mentioned ASU, the same thing. In the very same breath that the government, they're actually on strike now, as we all know, and nobody's saying anything about it. But in that same breath, I read last week that, or this week, I think it was earlier last week, that they've just approved several more federal varsities. Now, who in their right thinking minds, when you can't sustain the current number you have, would be creating more? You see, you have to ask yourself a fundamental question. It's not about political will. The truth of the matter is that we have ineffective systems. They're not working properly as they should be, and we are still feeding these machines. We say things like the government can pay. The truth is the government cannot pay. They will not be able to pay on a sustainable basis, which is why we have these periodic flare-ups. I can contract as many services as I want as a private individual, but eventually what is going to happen is I'm going to be playing my creditors off against each other. I'm not going to be answering my phone or my doorbell. I can say I can pay, but the question is, can I pay as and when due? So it now becomes a solvency issue after a while, and that's where we're getting to. So I am less concerned about the fact whether they actually solve it in the next 3 days. They probably will. But the truth of the matter is that when is the next shock coming? It's going to build up again. If you do not stop this process or change this process, as my fellow analyst said, you have to stop this subsidy system. There is no way out. I make the same point again. If you do not stop it today, you will definitely stop it eventually. Yeah. And that journey is going to cost all of us. It is costing us now. It will continue to cost us, whether it's universities, whether it's NLC, whether it's the fuel subsidy. All these areas is because of these inherent subsidies which we are so addicted to and will not let go of. Efficiency cannot come in. That is the price, I mean, that we are paying. We are all collectively paying it. So whether government can pay tomorrow or not, for me, good if they can, but we'll be here in 2 months. We'll be here in 6 months.
With the same issues?
With the same issues. And we'll be here in 5 years.
You know, no doubt the federal government's debt profile has continued to increase based on, of course, forex differentials, interest rates, which also is the reason why the figure we're talking about this morning is that high. It brings us back to the diversification of our economy, the over-dependency on oil. Just last week at the 175th OPEC meeting in Vienna, the countries have refused to, agree on a consensus. Of course, indeed, oil production, needs to be cut in the coming year. And already economists are also talking about the implication of dwindling global oil price on the 2019 budget. Are we paying lip service to diversifying our economy at a point in time where full subsidy still, remains and poses a large challenge to us as a nation?
Well, the truth of the matter is that, we are behaving like spoiled brats. We've been used to free oil money all these years. And that is why, I think that is majorly responsible for why a lot of the states are owing workers' salaries. Because most of the time, instead of them to think out of the box, to generate their revenue to sustain themselves, they are always waiting, to go cap in hand, for federal allocation. But the truth of the matter is that I think the time has come for us all to realize that unless we wake up to the reality that, look, we don't have to, continue to depend on this fuel as a means of, earnings to boost our economy, the better for us. Also, the government is doing fantastic well in, the area of agriculture. But you want to ask, how far has that impacted on the people? How many of our people are, really going into agriculture? And I believe strongly that just like we say, even as individuals, if you stay on one stream of income, you can never break out of poverty. That is why, economists or, wealth experts usually advise that for you to, be wealthy, you need to have multiple streams of income. And I tell people that, look, the way we run government is just like the way you run your personal life. When you know the leakages in your life, oh, I go to the pub every day. How much do I spend? Let me cut down on this. The same thing applies. We are talking about the deregulation. For me, the subsidy can only be removed when we have functional refineries located all over the country. Because you know why? These equalization funds, when you lift fuel from Lagos to maybe Kano, there's a cost involved. Until we are able to establish refineries maybe for the people in those particular regions, in that way we'll be able to eliminate a lot of these costs. But so long as the government is not able to put those mechanisms on ground, telling the government to deregulate now, like, putting Nigerians, on the suicide machine, and for people like us, we are vehemently against it.
Okay, Nnameka, let me take it from here to you now. Okay, I understand Nnameka is no longer on Skype with us, but Abi, let me cue in from there. Okay. If subsidy cannot be removed except we have functional refineries, we remember that at the time even the refineries were being sold in 2007 that we talked about earlier on, there were threats from Niger Delta. Some locals said, no, this is our heritage, you cannot sell it to anyone. If you're going to sell it, then sell it to us as Nigerians so we can own it and then run it. There were the issue of concession sometimes, they said no. So how does the government handle that dynamics of trying to ensure that there is peace in the area, everyone is on board when it comes to the way forward for this issue?
Thank you. Well, I think it's clear for a number of things. One of the things is obviously the refinery issue. I would beg to slightly differ. I actually don't think we actually require functional refineries before we remove the subsidy. Okay. I believe the market will provide the supply, just like it is in diesel. Okay, so it is something that there has to be pricing differentials based on the cost of delivering a product somewhere. You can't have equalization of price right across the board. Across the
country.
That is
because
the problem.
It costs more. Getting the fuel to some aspects of the
And that is where you now start coming up with issues like, from a different time where you place a refinery closer to the people. You actually don't need, what you need is effective rail transport to be able to move the quantities that you require. But has that been developed? No, it hasn't. We are still using the most inefficient method of distribution, which is the trucking system. So all of these things are obvious. They make sense. But when we put certain caveats that we cannot do X, you've already narrowed your options. you are not looking at the full spectrum of the solutions available. If it is that insistent and it comes in many forms, you cannot sell the refinery. It's our patrimony. You cannot remove the subsidy because that's where we partake. We must have the same price. Doesn't matter how difficult it is to do. You know, so once you start putting all these restrictive caveats, you end up with an inefficient system. We're all looking forward to the Dangote refinery. Guess what that's bringing? The end of subsidy. Because he is going to charge the dollar rate ex-factory gate. It is as simple as that. Otherwise, the investment does not make any sense. So therefore, it will be just, you will have the advantage of proximity, but guess what? He's not selling a subsidized rate. Unless that government is going to pick up the subsidy. And then guess what? It's still not going to be effective, because what is going to happen is that our neighboring countries will be willing to pay a higher price than anything the government can be able to match. What is Mr. Gandhi? And I hate to personalize it, but as a private operator, he will sell to who we can sell his product at the highest price.
We understand Ghana is even working out a template on how to get the refined products from the Dangote.
So it's not the solution
already
that we think is coming. It's going to help with the market and the deregulation effort.
And availability.
And availability. And if you think about it, it doesn't make any sense to hold it till then. I don't like to use the word suffer, but I've used it a couple of times. But from an economic perspective, that's what I mean. I don't actually mean physically suffering, because there are going to be challenges in supply and all of these inefficiencies, which we are insistent on and we say cannot be. Government cannot do everything. They literally cannot afford the business of government right now. If you look at the fundamentals of our numbers, how much we're spending on debt service and everything, we're heading towards a situation where they can't meet their obligations as at when due. This is a manifestation of that inability to meet its obligations, and it's not going anywhere. But we continue to believe, to a large extent, that they have all sorts of solutions available. They have very limited options available to them, and they're still fueling and narrowing those options even further. That is the real warning signal. That is the real challenge for the future as we see it. And
remember that when the previous government, attempted to remove subsidy, we monitored and observed the very angry reaction of the Nigerian populace. And this current government, what it told us was the reason why we're paying more for a litre of petrol today is because subsidy has been removed. Are we looking at a situation where Nigerians need to pay more, for us to finally put an end to this episode of subsidies? Because the last time we checked, the National Assembly says we are still paying subsidies.
Well, I think we must get one thing clear between the 2012 subsidy regime and the present subsidy. Okay. The 2012 subsidy regime was one which we confronted the government with the fact that, look, this was a fraud. And the government at first behaved as if, no, everything was all right. I can give you the statistics. When the government came on board in 2010, we were paying about 260-something billion naira yearly for subsidy. In 2011, it became about 400 billion plus. In 2012, from 400 billion plus, we're now paying about 1.3 trillion naira. And we said, no, government, there's something wrong.
Something is wrong.
That was when the government behaved as if, no, everything is all right. But when we went to the streets, the outcome was that the government did a U-turn, even though they didn't go back to the old price. And the investigative sessions by the House of Representatives revealed how much, people would just take their vessels to the sea, they'll pump in water, they'll come onshore, they'll pump out, and then they'll go and collect subsidy, of which some of the marketers are still in court for subsidy fraud by the FCC. In 2014, in the present regime, what the government has said is that, look, we cannot afford paying subsidy to ghost importers. But we all recognize the fact that the basic infrastructures to enable government to eliminate the payment of subsidy are not there. We must be very, very realistic. For example, as we sit here, NNPC has come out clearly. NNPC don't have storage tanks. So even if NNPC is importing, they are going to put those imported fuel in private tanks. Right. And when you put your products in private tanks, The man that built the private tax, did he build it for free?
Exactly, you have to pay.
You have to pay.
All right.
Those are the subsidy we pay.
Okay. That's Kujebe. I'm afraid we have to wrap it here. Executive Director, Kaviti for the Protection of People's Mandate. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us on the program today. Abi Ayida, economist, who joined us on TVC Breakfast. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.